Welcome to the Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin McKenna. Welcome to the Celtic State of Mind.
Hello.
Kevin. Hi there. We've known each other for some years now because you edited and assisted me with the Quality Street Gang book. When you look back to your Celtic youth, who was your Celtic team?
It would probably be the team immediately after the Lisbon Lions. I began to become familiar with the team as the Lions were being dismantled. So it was a mixture of the Lions and the likes of Harry Hood, Tommy Callaghan, those sorts of players. So the team that probably the Feyenoord European Cup, Leeds United, Fiorentina, Benfica season 1970. It's when I remember being aware of what was happening.
See, when I look at that particular season 50 years ago next year, and the run that Celtic went on to get to the final, in many ways far more difficult than the run to get to Lisbon. And the European performance almost season on season for about a decade, Kevin. I mean, to start supporting Celtic when we were a true European superpower, how did that feel? How were the European nights at Celtic Park?
Well, it's funny because when you're very young and you get plunged into that, I suppose people of my generation were fortunate at being taken along to see Celtic at a time of unprecedented and almost unbroken success. So you kind of took it for granted, and as you became more aware of their achievements and assessing it against the strength of other clubs and countries, you just went along to a European night expecting to win. Mm-hmm. I remember the experience of seeing them against Lisbon. The second time we played them, which was the season 72-73, beat them 2-1 at home. We're beaten 3-0 away. Previous season we'd beaten them 2-1 away and drew 1 each at home to go through to the European Cup semi-final. So to see a Celtic team in Europe being beaten 3-0, even though it was away from home, even though it was against a very strong Hungarian team, was a bit of a shock. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because prior to that, you'd beaten them. In fact, at that point, although Celtic were beginning to decline, I think that remains their longest winning sequence in Europe. And I think it was something like, or unbeaten sequence, starting in the previous season. Copenhagen at home, Sleman Wanderers home and away, Uzbek home and away, Inter Milan home and away, beaten in penalties, Rosenborg home and away, Uzbek home. I think that's the longest unbeaten streak Celtic have had in Europe.
It's incredible now when you look at how European football has developed, that you could win the European Cup playing 9 games. I mean, last season Celtic played something like 16 games in Europe to get to the...
That's half a league season almost.
It's incredible, and obviously the players now are making far more European appearances, but it's getting more and more difficult to progress. I mean, when you were looking at the Lions breaking up and this crop of youngsters coming through that you and I have spoken about many, many times, when you look at the players that were coming through, who were the guys that stood out for you as a fan, Kevin?
Dalglish, McCarry, Connolly, Vic Davidson. You're tempted to put David Hay in there, but for some reason you see David Hay as somebody maybe a bit older, because he just always looked more experienced. But it was that era, and you can, of them, and Paul Wilson, of course, and of them it was Vic Davidson who, according to Kenny Dalglish, was the most naturally gifted of them all, but he was the one that probably didn't, his career didn't do him justice. And it's quite interesting that with the revisionism that football supporters always conduct, there's been delayed inquests as to why the Lisbon Lions were allowed to break up so quickly. And I get that, because people like Tommy Gemmell, Willie Wallace, Bobby Murdoch were allowed to go to English teams who were and lower tier teams who were paying them bigger money than they were on at the best team in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you had this unprecedented in terms of quality group of youngsters who were coming through. So in any generation, there's going to be a dilemma, given that you only had, I think it was only one substitute at the time.
Yeah.
So you're thinking we need to keep these young players on side, because they're very gifted. But you can't just say, well, we'll have them in the squad and play them every so often, because you only had one substitute, and then not long after it was two substitutes maximum.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Dalglish, you mentioned Dalglish, he's an obvious name because of what he went on to achieve. But when Dalglish came into the team, he came in 68, and then you never saw him for another few seasons. And he come in when he was a wee bit older and wiser, and they changed his position, very much like McGrain. McGrain was 20 when he made his debut for Celtic.
Of course, I didn't mention Danny McGrain, unforgivably, in that group earlier, of course. I mean, that's 7.
Aye. And it's incredible. I mean, Vic Davidson, again, when we were doing the Quality Street Gang book, so many of his teammates spoke about the talented Davidson. He obviously had a good career, but up against so many talented players at Celtic, maybe didn't develop for a period to get into that first team and hold down a place. But people also talk about disappointment of George Connolly's career, even though he achieved so much before the age of 26. When he disappeared, how tragic was that for Celtic?
And I remember it was the way my dad and people of his generation talked about George Connolly. It was with reverence, and there was a palpable feeling of grief when it became clear to everyone around about 74, 75 that he was beginning to encounter problems and they wouldn't be seeing him again. There was real grief, because there was a feeling that of all of those players, this was somebody who was genuinely world class and could make a difference in a game at the top level. And the other tragic thing about it was that his demise happened a year after he won the Scottish Player of the Year, 1973. Mm-hmm. And I remember also at school, St Ninians in Kirknatilla, going on an outing, and the head teacher was there, and there was a radio bulletin on the bus that George Connolly had missed a Scotland game, or hadn't turned up. And I remember the head teacher of the school talking about this. This was news, and it was just this feeling of disappointment of that generation, that the boy wasn't coming back, that there were problems, and there wasn't anything like the same scrutiny of people's personal lives then as there are now, and because of that, there's been quite a lot of conspiracy theories about who knew what and what was happening in the Celtic dressing room, and bullying, but it could be anything. And Connolly himself has been rehabilitated a bit, because a few years ago he re-emerged from the shadows and talked about his alcoholism. But I don't remember him confirming or discussing any of the more lurid rumours that were suddenly appeared years later about what was happening in the Celtic dressing room.
It seems even now it was a shock, but it was also quite tragic in terms of the fact that Celtic and Scottish football lost one of their finest. I've been watching back on the Leeds United games, And some of the stuff he was doing with that ball was incredible, Kevin. You know, in the semi-final of the European Cup.
Tell me this: does a recording exist of the 90 minutes of both those Leeds United games, Hampden and Elland Road? Because the most I've ever seen is like 4 or 5 minutes from UEFA and on one of their kind of Champions League highlights products, and you know, a minute or so at Elland Road. But the games were recorded in their entirety.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I haven't seen Celtic TV because a few years ago they were putting on some. I mean, I think they played the full game of the Feyenoord final. But I'd love to see those two games
in their entirety.
And there's a market for them because they were two of the most iconic games Celtic have ever played, and they were recorded live or as live. And I don't think any Celtic supporter who came after that period has ever seen beyond the goals and a couple of highlights. Was
it Dalglish's leaving that convinced you that Celtic were no longer this European superpower?
No, probably before then. I remember watching them against a Greek team called Olympiakos Piraeus the season after Atletico Madrid. It was the first round of the European Cup, and it was one each at Celtic Park. I think it was 2-0 in Greece. And this Greek team, they were good, but you know, they weren't that good. But they were outstanding against. We were lucky to get a draw at Parkhead, and this is the first round, and so you kind of knew. Then the following season was even worse. We got put out in the quarter final of the Cup Winners' Cup by Sachsenring Zwickau from East Germany, who I think are currently playing in the third tier of Germany. Kenny Dalglish scored again. In fact, no, was it Paul Wilson that scored against Olympiacos? Anyway, Dalglish scored against Sachsenring and they equalised. But it was, I mean, we should have hammered them 4 or 5-0, and then the second leg was live on television at one of those hours where schools are agreeing to show it just to make sure nobody's dogging it. And you could tell how hopeless they were, and somehow or other they won nothing. And so it's the quarterfinals of the Cup Winners' Cup. Celtic should have been in the semis. I remember it wasn't a very strong competition. The Cup Winners' Cup was never that strong anyway, because it was the kind of least of the three tournaments, because very few other countries accorded the same importance to their cup competitions as Scotland and England did. So it was an opportunity. In fact, I think Anderlecht. Yeah, Anderlecht beat West Ham in the final that season. So that was a clear opportunity for Celtic to get to at least another European final, and that was it. And then the following season, we get dismantled by Wisła Krakow, and then it just began. And then the season after that, and another very weak Austrian team called SSW Innsbruck hammered us in Austria. So that's 4 seasons in a row we've been put out by a Greek team and a not very good East German team, a workmanlike Polish team, and a fairly weak Austrian team. 4 successive seasons. So it became clear that the club was settling for second best, and I think probably that's when it became clear to the fans that the club was in the hands of a bunch of incompetents who had got away with it because of the once in a lifetime excellence of the Lisbon Lions, but their failure to plan ahead. There are still questions over where all that money that was coming through the the cash turnstiles had gone to, but there was the club had settled to be an also ran in Europe at a time, I think, where they could have done something. And what Aberdeen and Dundee United did then between 1980 and 1985 showed you Celtic, there were pickings still to be had. This was before massive amounts of television money began to flow into the top 4 leagues. So there was still clubs who looked after their businesses properly and who hired good coaches. There were rewards to be had because there could be an even split between great players, not so great players to mould into a team. Now, of course, no team outside the top 4 can build a proper team, because as soon as any promising player emerges, they're immediately snapped up.
Make them an offer they just can't refuse. And I mean, the Ajax being the most recent example of that, Kevin. I think when you're looking at that with hindsight, you knew watching Celtic that we were being run by incompetence. I mean, we're selling our best players. The Quality Street kids were sold off, Macari, Hay, and then Dalglish.
And the Dalglish one, I mean, even there, I remember vividly the day. I think it was the 4th of August '77. I was climbing the Campsie Hills with my pal, and the word came back on, I think it was Radio Clyde we were listening to, he's away. But we kind of knew that was happening because I think Celtic were playing in Australia in a 14 tournament that included Red Star Belgrade, memory serves, and the Australian national team, and Dalglish didn't travel. And then at 440,000. Oh, who thinks that's a... So that was also part of the wider incompetence of the Celtic board, that when they actually had a sellable asset, they couldn't even get the proper market price for them. And how many Liverpool people have you heard say that was the biggest steal?
Exactly.
And their entire history, even now, they still can't believe that they managed to get Kenny Dalglish, best player in Scotland for a generation, over several years, for less than £500,000. I mean, I couldn't argue with him going, because he went at 26, 27. I mean, we get a good 6 or 7 years out of him. So there's no complaints there.
See, when you look at the sale of Dalglish, the previous chaps we've mentioned, but even further back, your Paddy Crerins, Willie Fernie, we were always selling Bobby Collins the best assets for big money.
Well, if you look at that period between 1954, when Celtic won a double, and 1965, when we won the Scottish Cup, we won 2 League Cups, Partick Thistle, and then the 7-1 game against Rangers. And I think people looking back at that think, God, must have been a really bad Celtic team. It wasn't. It was. I mean, when I remember doing the Celtic Opus, and we wanted a section in it, coming up with the 50 best Celtic players, and we had like various people sitting on a sort of committee, and then got this fit. This included former Celtic players, a couple of, I think Gordon Strachan was part of this as well, various supporters, and the amount of players from that era who were considered to be in the all-time top 50 was incredible. Fernie, of course, Bobby Collins, Bobby Evans, John McPhail, Billy McPhail,
Bertie Peacock.
Yeah. And what was happening? Well, we know what was happening. Robert Kelly was running the show. Robert Kelly, who was people say he was a stockbroker. He wasn't. He was a stockbroker's clerk. And he wasn't the brightest either. And that man and his family, I think, are singularly responsible for Celtic underachieving at two periods in their existence when they should have been doing more.
Mm-hmm.
But all those, as soon as anyone showed a bit of promise, he was sold. And you have to then start asking, so why were they in such a hurry to sell players as soon as they were good? What happened to the money?
Mm.
Did it ever get reinvested? I mean, remember, there's next to no financial scrutiny of football clubs then, as was shown a few years later with the death of Third Lanark. So it was a template, and of course, yeah, I mean, you look at some of the earlier fanzines like the Celt, who talked about, there were actually demonstrations, there were protests, but they were just brushed off because, again, there was no press scrutiny.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know the press got a hard time for alleged bias one way or the other and incompetence, but without the press, these days, and certainly in our case, we wouldn't have managed to get rid of the old board. And it was because there wasn't as much press scrutiny in the 50s and the 60s that directors could get away with that sort of behaviour. Those failures.
Going even into the 80s, when you look at, obviously Steen's time came to an end. The one and only man that could have taken over from him takes over, but he eventually leaves because of the board.
Mm-hmm.
We lose one of the greatest talents we've had for a long, long time in Charlie Nicholas. At the time, the board might have sold that story that Charlie wanted to leave.
Well, the Charlie Nicholas one is it annoys me that Celtic fans have been sold, have bought into this fiction that he was desperate to leave in 1983. My understanding from several sources, including Charlie Nicholas, is that he was happy to stay for another 2 or 3 seasons. But Celtic were basically putting him in a taxi and driving him to the airport to get him to London. Celtic wanted him to go because they'd never seen a cheque for 725,000. And again, there's not much financial scrutiny. What do you do with 725,000? Well, it certainly wasn't put into the team. So that's my understanding is that he was marched out the door by Celtic, whether he liked it or not. And I think it's unfair on him that this fiction has been allowed to grow up, and it was fed and watered initially by the Celtic board.
So that ability or inability of the Celtic board to take something that's good and sell it off to the highest bidder, we found ourselves moving into the late 80s with a stadium which wasn't fit for purpose. And actually when McNeil took over, it looked as though we had a squad that wasn't fit for purpose, Kevin, but Billy McNeil with the centenary year was almost an anomaly in a number of years where the board completely underperformed. When did it become clear to you in the 1990s that we were at crisis point?
Well, we kind of knew at some point the season after the centenary season. I mean, when Billy McNeil came in, he made 4 excellent purchases: Andy Walker, Billy Stark, Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, and then augmented that with the purchase of Joe Miller, which had everybody buzzing. And it was a lot of money. But then the following season, there were the 2 quite heavy defeats by Rangers at Ibrox, and then a heartbreaking defeat at Celtic Park where we missed a penalty. And winning the cup to stop Rangers winning the treble was fine. But it became clear, because Frank McAvenny didn't stick around for very long. I forgot about Frank McAvenny as well, getting him. So So you were left to conclude a few years later that that was money that Celtic were struggling to get together, but they knew they had to come up with something special for the centenary year. But I think the impact, the psychological impact of Maurice Johnston, that the Maurice Johnston saga is incalculable, and the jolt that it must have given Rangers, you know, is it can only be guessed at as well. And I think this kind of depression settled on Celtic. Rangers were buying players like Oleg Kuznetsov, Mikhailichenko, genuine world-class players. And I mean, there was about 30 odd players that Rangers bought. You know, including, who was the wee winger from Norwich that they got?
It's a Dale Gordon.
Cracking wee player.
Mm-hmm. Big money as well.
David Robertson at Aberdeen, full-back. There was a guy called Mel Sterling. Was it Mel Sterling?
That's right, aye.
Excellent player. That's before you get to your Trevor Stevens, Gary Stevens, Paul Gascoigne, Laudrup. Haley was a magnificent player for them. He was like a lion. I mean, put the rivalry aside, but God, Haley was some player in full cry who didn't complain when he got hit and relished a physical battle. Celtic had no chance, and we didn't have any strategy to deal with it. I mean, the old board will say now that, well, because of what's happened to Rangers, that they had no chance because the Rangers were paying money they didn't have. But with Celtic, there was that doesn't address the fact that between 89 and 95 we didn't win a thing. Couldn't even beat Wraith Rovers in the League Cup final. Getting put out by Airdrie and Falkirk in successive seasons in League Cup. First round defeat against Motherwell, getting hammered 5-1 by Neuchâtel Xamax. I mean, the Partizan Belgrade fiasco, that was another landmark, and it was, I think, gave us a bit of a psychological blow. And so there was all those things that had, Rangers had money they were spending, which was probably on the never, but there were 18 trophies to win, and we hardly got a sniff at any of them. And it wasn't Rangers that was putting us out, because we actually had a very good cup record against Rangers in that period. Graham Souness and Walter Smith's Rangers had a fairly patchy record in the Scottish Cup. It was Motherwell's, Airdrie's, Falkirk's that were putting us out. Wraith Rovers in the final, Falkirk in 97. No excuses.
No, absolutely.
The sort of players that we were getting in were just, Raphael shite is one thing, but he was just a symptom of a greater malaise. There were some shocking footballers. And then the kind of casualties there were the likes of Paul McStay, whose best years, unfortunately, were in a bad Celtic team. And then you had great wee uncut diamonds like Andy Payton. I saw him in social media recently, and I think he seemed taken aback by how fondly he was regarded by people like us that actually saw him, because he worked his socks off for Celtic, scored some cracking goals. But
in a very, very difficult period for him coming up here.
Andy Payton was, did a job for us. Likewise, in a slightly later era, Pat McGinley, 12 goals from midfield in any year is good, but in a team like that, excellent. But Tommy Burns couldn't wait to get him out the door because he wanted money for O'Donnell. God rest him. Just errors of judgment, incompetence all the way down the line, and Rangers filled their boots. When people talk about comparing the merits of the Celtic 9-in-a-row team and the Rangers 9-in-a-row team, the one fact that shines out is that in Celtic's 9-in-a-row season era, Rangers, they had to overcome a very, very good Rangers team who won a European trophy, were runners-up in another European trophy, had some superb footballers, and also for 3 or 4 years very good Hibs teams and very good Aberdeen teams. Yeah. When Rangers won the 9 in a row, they were up against a Celtic team that has never been weaker. Now, I'm not saying that Rangers didn't have a good team or that they didn't deserve to win that 9 in a row. They had some excellent players, but my God, we made it easy for them. That board made it easy for them.
See, when you look at McCann and the way that he was able to not only save the club but build the club since the takeover, do you see comparisons between him and the way that Lowell runs Celtic?
Well, it was different. I think McCann was under the pressure. McCann was under was incredible, and Lowell's had nothing like that. Because McCann was being asked to come up with form a club within 2 years that was capable of stopping Rangers winning 10 titles in a row, or just winning a league any time. But he also knew that the club was in a far worse state financially and far closer to collapse than probably he had thought when he first got involved in the enterprise. And also the press, because there were certain individuals associated with the old board and 1 or 2 rivals of McCann afterwards who leveraged anti-McCann coverage for their own personal vindictive ends. So you'd all that going on, and it would have been easy for McCann to say, right, we're going to just go and get a couple of big vanity purchases, to make it look like we're really taking this seriously. But at the back of his mind, he's thinking, if Celtic go out of business because we tried to stop Rangers winning 10 titles, that's a calamity, obviously. So the fact that he resisted all the pressure to do that, when only he knew how bad, how much Celtic had been run into the ground by the previous board, was astonishing. Peter Lawwell is different, because I think that there seems to be much more concern about shareholder value and their duties to shareholders, and he gets this sort of, Peter does a good job as a chief executive, but Celtic are a small to medium enterprise, an SME. They've fewer than 500 employees. The average salary for a chief executive of an SME in Scotland is about 200 grand. Peter picks up, including bonuses, almost 10 times that. And I hate it when he or others associated with Celtic talk about shareholder value and their fiduciary duty to the shareholders. Well, does the amount of money paid in by supporters purchasing merchandise, are they not okay? They might not appear on the list of shareholders, but they've got their expectations as well.
I think two of the biggest issues the Celtic support has with Peter Lawwell is missing out on John McGinn, which has turned into a bit of a shocking decision, and losing Kieran Tierney. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, mainly. I suppose. I think you can't overestimate the paranoia that the current custodians of the club, including Peter Lawwell, have about never ever been in the situation we were in 1993, 1994, and perhaps erring on the side of caution when it comes to spending money, and I get that. Nevertheless, not getting John McGinn when we could have was a serious error of judgment, because he will be a world-class player, a Scotland captain, and will be playing for either a top 4 club in England, Spain, Italy, anywhere he chooses. The only upside to that, I suppose, is that I wonder if Charlie Christie would have been given his extended run in the team and his breakthrough period last season if we'd got John McGinn, but who knows. The other big error, I think, is the amount of time we've known that we needed an out-and-out left-back, and we haven't got one. And Bolingoli isn't an out-and-out left-back. We don't want anything flash. I mean, like a Lee Naylor type, who just knows the position, can mark a player and he's fit, knows what to do when a ball comes into the box when Celtic are under attack. That's all. We're not looking for somebody who can, play brilliant 40-yard passes, and we'll not get another Kieran Tierney, who's got that superhuman lung strength. And why, £10 million we've spent. We've spent £10 million on 2 players to play in the sort of game that we played against same sort of opponents as Cluj, 3rd round qualifiers. They weren't there. Don't know what's going on. I mean, you also have to temper this with the fact that there's so much that will happen behind the scenes and in the politics of big football clubs, including Celtic, that we'll never ever be party to. And Celtic aren't exactly the greatest at communicating anyway. We all love to think we're kind of left of centre, lefty, liberal socialists, but we basically follow a club which adheres to a 19th century capitalist doctrine, and it's got more Tories in it on its board than the 1922 committee. But that's their choice. We kind of know that. We just suck it up, and they know we will, because there's something else going on. But we're basically, but then football fans turn into fascists. Think nothing of slaughtering somebody for 4 bad days at the office, having him sacked, whereas if the same thing happened to us in our own places of work, we'd be going nuts. But that's the nature of football fans.
Well, Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on A Celtic State of Mind. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
A Celtic State of Mind can be found at axom.net. We're sponsored by Fansbet, the betting company by fans for fans.